Hello, my name is Anna Marie Sulminski, and I'm an undergraduate student in the Health and Human Service Department, majoring in Communication Sciences and Disorders. My honors project is based around an analysis of people with aphasia completing a narrative task. Aphasia can be described as a neurogenic language disorder. Speech and language skills are interactive tools among communicators. It is important to use these tools to express wants, needs, opinions, and ideas. Without the use of speech and language, people may not have the ability to connect with one another. Researchers have shown that without these types of skills, the quality of life may become lower. A stroke or a traumatic brain injury can influence this high quality of life. Aphasia may be the result of a stroke. The specific type of aphasia that we are looking at during this study is fluent aphasia. This type of aphasia may affect cohesion skills. This type of skill describes the ability to determine the meaning between events within conversations and within narratives. Because of this, people with fluent aphasia can have the capability to express words for a story, but may not understand the meaning or connection within the story. Treatment strategies can be used for people with aphasia to enhance speech and language skills. Before treatment can be implemented, SLPs, or speech-language pathologists, have to determine goals for the client to work on and modify these goals as therapy progresses over a period of time. An example of a long-term goal may be teaching techniques for improving storytelling skills. Storytelling greatly relates to speech and language as individuals must utilize vocabulary, sequencing skills, and memory. Narrative drives skills such as knowledge of the world or using inference and critical thinking to fully understand the message. Vladimir Propp, who's the writer of Morphology of Folk Tale, created 31 functions that categorize the sequencing of a plot. Within this book, Propp describes the summary of each function, its definition, and the common signs to look for within a story. We've identified 16 of Propp's functions to be used within the participants of this story of Cinderella. However, 11 was used by the participants themselves out of the 16 for the story of Cinderella. Another source of sequencing in narration is common among SLPs and teachers. This kind of sequencing is identified as the major components of story grammar. Within this structure, there are 7 components, each identifying a specific part of the plot within a story. So, if we were to look down at Figure 2, we can see a whole bunch of data collection that we've done. We have used a database called Aphasia Bank. Within this database, we have access to participants who have different types of aphasia. We focused on participants with fluent aphasia, and we've randomized all the participants with fluent aphasia, and from that randomized sample, we've taken 10 participants to use to collect for this data. So this database also includes videos of the people with aphasia, as well as transcriptions for all of the different tasks that have been completed by each participant. And one of the tasks that was completed are a narrative task. Within this specific context, they have told the story of Cinderella. We've identified the age of the participants, their years of education, and the amount of years that they've had aphasia from the database that they've given us. So we have taken the transcriptions that were provided from the videos and placed them into a Word document. And within that Word document, it says all of the transcriptions that the participants have said, including errors and what the participants may have meant. So in Figure 1, the participant in line 227 has said sipper instead of slipper, and right next to sipper, you can see that the database has identified that that was the target word that the participant was going for. So within Figure 2, we can see the different steps of Cinderella. we have taken the transcriptions that were used and paraphrased them into different steps so that we can identify props functions and the story grammar components that match along line with those steps. So there are 11 different types of props functions that are used within this specific figure and that we have used within this study. For the most important parts to identify is to look at the setting and character, the internal plan, and the reaction. So the setting and character usually aligns with the props functions of absentation and interdiction. Absentation would be when the father passes away at the beginning of the story. It senses when the character is leaving from the story, and that's what absentation is identified by prop. Interdiction would be Cinderella being identified as the maid, or she has to do work for the house. She's being told to do things. And that both of those align with setting and character, which is identified within the stories as well. So even under CMU 01A, props functions interdiction aligns with the setting and character. The next part that's important to know is the internal plan. Although this seems like the plan that the main character has come up with and what they're going to do to continue along their journey, we've identified the internal plan as Cinderella going to the ball and losing her glass slipper. This would be the turning point in the story, and we've identified this as the middle part of the story, or the internal plan, to keep the progression of the story going. The reactions would be the last part to note within this figure 2, and the reaction would be when Cinderella tries on the shoe and it fits, as well as the wedding at the end of the story. And within props functions, these align really well with one another, as the hero is recognized and the wedding. So the hero being recognized is when Cinderella tries on that glass slipper and it fits. And then the wedding is, of course, when Cinderella and the prince get married. For this specific study, we've also identified the wedding as happily ever after. So a lot of the participants may have used the phrasing happily ever after instead of saying that they got married, and we have concluded that this would be appropriate to identify as the wedding. So within our results section, we can see in figures 3 and 4, figure 3 would be props functioning and figure 4 would be the story grammar components, that there are some very specific things that I wanted to note. So within props functions, 9 out of 10 participants have included the interdiction function within their story of Cinderella. As you can see, it number 2 is interdiction, and it's at 90%. And of course, like I said earlier, this interdiction function aligns really well with the setting and character as who Cinderella is. She's the maid of the family and she does the work of the household. And this is a very big character component and setting that is always based at the beginning of the story. And you can see that this aligns with figure 4, number 1 being setting and character. 9 out of 10 participants, once again, used that setting and character component within their story. And I also wanted to note that the same individual, the same participant who did not use interdiction within their story also did not use the setting and character component. So this clearly shows that we can take props functions and the story grammar components and align them with one another to show how a narrative story may progress. Again, within the story grammar components in figure 4, we can see that the next highest one tied with the setting and character is the internal plan. And like I mentioned earlier, we've identified this as the turning point in the story when Cinderella loses her glass slipper. And once again, 9 out of 10 participants have included this within their story. And the next highest thing, tied with the initiating event, would be the reaction when Cinderella tries on the glass slipper and they get married. And if we look at this compared to props functions, we can see that those components are also the 3 highest within props functioning as well. Number 2 being the interdiction, number 4, 6, and 8, the departure, the recipient of the agent, which is the magical agent when the fairy godmother comes in, and the hero is being pursued by the prince, are all tied in the middle. That's the meat of the story, the middle of the story. And at the end are the 2 highest components, again, right after interdiction, with 7 out of 10 participants including it, is the hero is recognized and the wedding, which aligns with the reactions of the story grammar components. One specific thing that I wanted to note is the participant Thompson 13A has a very particular interesting thing that I wanted to note. So Thompson 13A has the same number of years of education as one of the other participants, but this is the highest level of education that we have among these 10 participants. As you can see within figure 2 is this individual had the least amount of functions and components that were identified. We were not able to specifically identify the functions and the components because this individual was not describing the story of Cinderella. Instead, it was a different type of story. We did not know the beginning, middle, and end ground to identify the functions and the components. However, this individual used some high-level vocabulary, such as in line number 3 of the Cinderella steps, you can see it says, Cinderella longs to be a top-ranking aristocrat. And this is high-level vocabulary. And while we may not be able to draw the conclusion about the level of vocabulary and the level of education, this would be a great opportunity to take this question and ask how vocabulary skills are affected after the onset of aphasia and how that's linked to the level of education. So we know that SLPs and speech language pathologists can use story functioning components during treatment. It's important to initially establish how individuals with aphasia start functioning with their narrative storytelling at the beginning of treatment. Are they able to identify a beginning, middle, and end as these 10 individuals have been able to do? Although not all 10 did this, 7 out of 10 of these participants have included a beginning, middle, and end. And if this is a common thing among individuals with aphasia, SLPs will be able to first use assessments to understand if an individual with aphasia can identify a beginning, middle, and end, even if it's not a cohesive narrative. Are they able to include a beginning, middle, and end, something that we've learned that's been innate in during our development and that we've learned as young students, that beginning, middle, and end plot structure. And when SLPs can determine this, they can use that application and use these functions and components during treatment to identify the parts of a story that they are telling, that the client would be telling during treatment. We can identify that this would be the setting and the character, and that this would be the turning point in the story by identifying whether it's the props functions or story grammar components. Identifying these points in the story may be able to help the client progress forward using storytelling skills. They can use this technique that they've learned in therapy to identify story functions and story components and think about those components and functions during other stories before they are being told. And by providing this technique and this tool for narrating story, these clients may be able to improve upon language.